it's really important, not just from like getting along with people or running your business, but like for your health, for your longevity, for all your body's systems to operate effectively. Because all your systems in your body, whether it's your respiratory, your cardiac system, your digestive system, they all need to work together in some form, right? And so it's much easier for your brain to be able to send all these signals when there's a rhythm coming through that makes sense, that it's rhythmic and smooth rather than chaotic.
And welcome to this episode of Exploring Emotional Overdraft. Already, Jillian and I, Jillian Riddell is with me today, and we've already started. We've just started talking from the moment we got back on this call. So hopefully we've saved some of the good stuff for you. But Jillian is an ER nurse. It's ER in America, isn't it?
It is,
The
yeah,
ER. An
emergency.
emergency room nurse. She's also the host of Life Without Secrets podcast, which is brilliant. I recommend it to you. She's a relationship expert and she's a mother. But that's the headlines, Jillian. Could you welcome? But could you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are right now?
Oh my goodness. Well, I just want to say, first of all, thank you so much for having me on here. I honestly feel like this is such an honor. I was just explaining to Andy how I literally have this book, Emotional Overdraft, that Andy wrote on my desk. I read a lot of books. And so there's a few that if I write like a ton of notes or if I like flip over the pages to save them a lot, then I'll keep them kind of near me because there's a reason for that. Right. And I think, um, we can read a bunch of books, but if we don't apply the things that we learn to our lives, like what's the point of reading them? And so the ones that really impact me the most, I try to keep close by. So thank you for writing that book. And thank you for coming on my podcast because I remember reading your book and going, I got to have Andy on my show. So I'm excited to be here, first of all. So I just want to say thanks for having me. And then, I'm excited to share a little bit about my story and how I got there. I mean, we could go way back because I think the origin of where we come from often predicts like how we respond to things in our daily life, even today. And I think it takes a lot of self-awareness about where we come from and what's going on in our real life and how those two play a role together, and how we interact with the world. And so a little bit about me and where I started was I actually was a secret until I was 18. And often people will be like, what does that mean? Well, my dad actually hid me from a secret or as a secret from his family. So I was a product of an affair. And you can imagine the emotions that come with finding out that these people you know about don't know anything about your existence at an age of 11 or 12. So I had a lot of self-worth issues, people pleasing, and I think oftentimes, we have these voids in our life, and sometimes we don't know where they come from, but we have a void in our life that we try to fill. And oftentimes we try to fill those voids with either achievements or addictions. And this is what I've seen in my own life, and it's also what I see in the emergency room, every single day that I go to work. And so for me, it was the achievements, and I was almost, addicted to achieve, not for my internal purpose, but for an external result. And so in high school, I struggled with trying to be the person I thought everybody else wanted me to be. I ended up pregnant actually at 17 in high school. So I was a teen mom. I had my first child at 18 years old, which obviously comes with a whole lot of adversity and stress. And instead of actually sitting in the emotions that I felt, all I knew was to push through, keep growing, going, be strong, achieve, so people will continue to like you and that they will love you and that they'll believe in you. I had a teacher in high school that I was actually close to. And I remember them saying, when they found out I was pregnant, "Oh man, you had so much potential," like I no longer was going to be worth anything. I was just going to become another statistics. And how many of us can really relate to that, in the fact that our external world kind of predicts what we become or what we are capable of, you know? And I want to remind everybody when I tell this story that, like, you are capable of so much, and, you know, you are worthy. And, you know, the choices that we make, um and the way that we perceive our internal world is so important. And so I did the achievements. So I started college on a Monday when I was 18 and 9 months pregnant. I had my son on a Monday when I was 9 months pregnant in college, my first month of college. I went back to college the next Monday, and I became valedictorian at my college. Okay, so I mean, this doesn't, like, right? Like, I will tell you, one of my most, we'll get into it later, but one of my most memorable, positive, thrilling, most confident building moments of my life was walking across that stage at my college graduation and becoming the emergency room trauma nurse I am today. So, you know, these things can serve us, right, for a time period, and the things that we go through can serve us, but we have to know when we need to sit back and realize where we are internally, not just externally. And I didn't do this until years into being a nurse, and also being married. And I say to people, you know, my husband and I came in with our grief cases from childhood, right? That's what I call it, because we both came from broken families. And in the beginning of a relationship, oftentimes people will find that relatable, right? And so you get connected by the thing that you have in common. But if we don't know how to unpack those grief cases together, we end up just being each other's own source of grief and adding to our grief case that's already heavy. And what happens is, eventually those seams get weaker, and eventually the grief case is going to open, and, you know, it's going to be like a tornado running through our lives. And that's really what happened to my life. And so you know, I we did the work. We went through trauma therapy, Christian family therapy. You know, we had, like, master teachers. I mean, we did so much work. We were paying a mortgage payment in our growth, and I will tell you, it was worth it. And now I also have a program for couples based on the certifications I've gotten from there, based on what we have come out of. And I love teaching people how to transform from the inside out. And so I do still work in the ER. I work in there one day a week. I teach a relationship course, and I love helping people just take, you know, what they're going through and really process that, and then, you know, work develop from the inside out. So that's kind of what I do now. Just to give you a long spiel of where I'm at today and how I got there, a little bit about my life.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing that. And as you were talking, it occurred to me why I think I've connected with you during our conversations. I was adopted I was given away at 2 days old, but I was adopted at 4 weeks. And my mother was 15, so she was very young. And I spent most of my early days trying to people please, trying to prove that I was worthy. Spent years, probably still do it. I probably still do it at 59, still trying to do it. But I'm more aware of it now. That's the
That's
key.
exactly it. Yep.
So what you're saying is really resonates, and you know, I don't tend to focus. I'm a coach, not a psychologist, so I tend to focus on what we do next rather than why we're like we are. But I think there's a place for why we are where we are. Stopping and reflecting and understanding that is really important. And I love your grief cases idea. I love that idea of, you know, let's recognize it, hold it, and then deal with it, which is
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
lovely thing.
It's like, it's about, you know, when this comes out, what drawer are we gonna put it in? What shelf is it gonna go on? You know, what do we do when that drawer opens? What does it look like, you know, in a relationship or for ourselves?
So just quickly for everyone, because we've got straight into this and it's fantastic, and I knew we would. But to explain for first-time listeners what an emotional overdraft is, and thank you, Gillian, for waving the book. God bless you. Um, But an emotional overdraft is when, as I define, is when you subsidize your success at the cost of your own mental or physical well-being. And the book is written for business people and leaders, but Gillian would argue that it relates just as well to humans. It's a universal situation. So when we subsidize the success of whatever we're doing at the cost of our own mental or physical well-being, and that's an emotional overdraft. And if you stay in your emotional overdraft, you damage your resilience, which means you're less able to respond and have the same impact that you otherwise would. So it's a bad and expensive place to be. So that's why we talk about it, and that's why hopefully that makes sense of what Gillian just said and why we're talking today. Um, and one other thought, because this is supposed to be about you talking and not me, but when you said, we as the child, there's an expression which is "show me the 7-year-old and I'll show you the man," which obviously or woman, but it's an old expression. But show me the 7-year-old and I'll show you the man, and that always comes to me. I think it's so true. You see a 7-year-old and you know to a great degree of accuracy what that person's likely to become. And then I think about that and I think, but their potential to be more, their potential to change is so huge. And that's, to some extent, that expression reflects the limiting factors we put on ourselves. And you mentioned Inside Out. This is my rambling way of getting back to that. And there's Michael Neill's amazing book called The Inside Out Revolution. And this we create our own realities in our own heads, and then we respond to those realities. When you talked about Inside Out earlier, what were you thinking when you said that? How could we use that to usefully start to understand our emotional overdraft, do you think?
Yeah, well, so first of all, emotional overdraft is so real. And, I have felt that in my life, being that I was, the people pleaser as well and trying to achieve. I never did look inside, like we were talking about. And so I had an emotional overdraft, and that really creates the tornado too. And, so speaking of inside out, I think of a lot of people aren't really aware of how they feel. And if we don't know how we feel, then we don't know what we need. And so oftentimes we are going through the world and we might say, I feel stressed, right? We hear that a lot, or I'm busy. These are words that we use a lot. But what is stress to you? What is, because there's stress, right? Which is usually a feeling or an emotion. When we say stress, we usually have an emotion behind that, like angry, frustrated, impatient. There's lots of negative emotions we could tie into stress, right? And then there's stressors, which are the things that cause the stress in our lives, right? That cause us to have the feelings of anger, frustration, etc. And so I love like teaching people exercises of like really going deeper into those feelings, and taking a pause and going, yeah, how do I really feel about this situation? Because when we do the work and I can totally go through an exercise with you that I do with my clients as well, and what I teach, because when you end up on the other side, you'll get to what you need, and not just on a external level of what you need. Like, I don't need a coffee. I don't, it's more of like, what does my inner self need to build that resilience, to increase my inner battery? Why do I feel so depleted? What are those things that are depleting me? And what can I do right now in this moment to increase the energy that I have? And so these are the things that I think are really important just to start with. And I think that when we start doing this over and over again, we start building that self awareness. Like you and I, we talk about like how, nobody's perfect. And we get into situations where, like I was just telling you, earlier about how, this is a perfect time for this interview because I just had a moment where I was just in total overwhelm. And July was a moment of, I kind of retreated from things, and I got some clarity, and my husband and I would have clarity sessions.
I love that you said that. I love that. I scribbled it down. Clarity sessions with your husband. So
Yeah.
what does that mean?
So we go through the exercise. I use some of the things that I use in my couples course to start, and we start with like getting to where we are right now in this current moment. Like, what are the things that are stressing us, right? What are the things that are good? And we start there before we go anywhere into the future. We talk about like where we are in the present moment because I always refer to like your, Google or Apple Maps. If you want to get somewhere and your phone can't tell you how to get there unless they know where you are currently. And so that's just in life. Like we have to know where we are to get to where we want to go, you know? And so is it okay if I walk you guys through the exercise
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
that we do? Okay. So I love teaching this. It's one of my favorite things to teach because I just think it's so important. So the first thing we do, and I actually have my list here next to me just because I think I'm going to show it to you on the screen when we go through this. So I want you to get a piece of paper out if you're listening to this.
Do you want me to do this, or are you just going to talk us through this?
I'll just talk you through this. You can do it if you'd like, but so I want you to write 3 columns on your paper. So it's going to look kind of like this. If you're on video, there's just a piece of paper with 3 columns. The first column is going to be write stressor. That's going to be the title of the first column. The second column is going to be your emotional reaction, and the third column is what I do now. Okay, so then I'm gonna ask you, like, anything that is bringing you, like, a negative emotion in your life, like, I want you to write down those stressors in your life. These are things that it could be like, I could even give you some of my things, but anything that causes stress, workload, computer problems, money to pay your bills, job security, um, like sleep disruption, lack of clarity, work environment, a perceived lack of time, feeling pulled in many directions, um, not eating right, like I mean, so and I'll tell you, I don't know if I have, oh yes, I do. So this was my list and I just kept writing. So this is during our first clarity session for me and my husband in the month of July. This is what we did. Okay. So we get out everything off our chest. This was mine. Okay. This is me. This is my husband. So if you're just
I knew that. I knew that
if
was
you're
going to be the case.
if you're just listening to this, I'm holding up a piece of paper that is front to back listed and loaded of all the things that are stressing me out, the little things, the big things, how I feel about it, what I do now. And then there's a smaller list, a piece of paper that has like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 things on it from my husband, and I probably have 30. Okay, so once you write down the stressor, I want you to write next to it in that second column the emotional reaction you have to that stressor. And being that nobody ever asked me how I felt when I was younger. It just wasn't talked about. Emotions were never a topic of conversation. And so if you're anything like me and you're really not sure how to describe how you feel, I want you to go on Google and I want you to just type in 100 list of emotions. And it'll pull up like a list of a bunch of different emotions. I want you to print that piece of paper out and I want you to have it next to you when you do this exercise. And I want you to do this exercise every morning and every night, just so you know, because this is how we're going to
There's
build
also
self
that
awareness.
brilliant. I don't know if you read the Atlas of the Heart by Brené Brown.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I
So
love
she
her.
she defines 87 emotions
Oh, perfect.
in
You can use
detail and
that one.
explains them. So, but what you're saying is we need lots more words than
We
good,
do.
bad, sad, happy,
Yes.
angry.
Yes.
We
Yeah.
need many more words to describe it, don't we?
Yes, we absolutely do. And there's a reason why I tell you to do this because you're going to write the emotional reaction. I'm not going to get ahead of myself yet. So, emotional reaction, get your 100 list, find the emotion that connects with, maybe it's sleep disruption, maybe it's lack of clarity, whatever that stressor is, write what your emotion is next to it that it creates for you by that list of emotions. So, you have a better word for it. Then I want you to write next to that, what do you do now in response to that stressor in your life? Okay, so oftentimes mine is like push through, complain, rehash, withdraw. Okay, and the reason why we're doing this is when you're all done with this exercise, more than likely you're going to find an emotion that is more common than another. And you're also going to find like that, your typical reaction is that you just push through or you complain or you withdraw. There's going to be something that is a pattern for you. Okay. And this is just building a self awareness. This is a no judgment zone. This is how we, get to where we are right now. Okay, so this is a really important exercise. I think it's better to do it over time. I've done this exercise for years now. I've been doing this, and so I can come up with this list in not very many seconds because I know that I'm aware. I'm very aware of what's going on inside of me, but that doesn't mean when you have that awareness, we also need to have a tool to get it out, because revealing is healing. So when we get it out, then we kind of leave our brain open for what's next. Okay. And so we do this exercise, then what we do is we put it in more of like a bubble form. So like we go through our stressors, and this is how we do our first clarity session. Go through our stresses, we get them all down, and there's two things that like really happen, right? It's our self-awareness, but when you're speaking in like couple forms, or even if you're in, this could totally work in like a business partnership as well. Um there's it's for yourself, it's also for the other person, because in that moment, my husband goes, "Oh my goodness, you're still writing? Like, I didn't know you had so much, like, stress on your plate." Like, and there builds a compassion, for the other person and what they're going through, and awareness of like, "Wow, this is what you're going through. Like, let's work together on some of these things," you know? So that's another good reason. And then why are we having this clarity session in the first place? So then we create, have you ever seen a mind map?
Yeah.
You heard of
Yeah.
it? Okay. So,
And we'll put up a template for this in the notes, and we'll put an example of a mind map as well
oh,
to
that
show
would be
people.
awesome. Yeah. So, and, just so you can see it, it's like you start with a circle of like maybe what the problem is. And then you just kind of, you let your brain go wherever it goes, and you just branch out from that circle. And you're not supposed to filter whatever comes up. You just write it down. And if it pertains to something that's already on your map, then you just draw a circle from that circle kind of situation. And this is allowing us to like reveal what's stressing us out, get a little bit creative on, what the problem it is. Do we have any solutions? What's coming up in our brain? What do we actually need clarity on? And then we can get ourselves in a more positive place from there. Okay, so we're dumping the brain, and then we're gonna get more positive. So I always like in that moment when you're done, releasing the stress, going through the bubbles, I always pause at that point, and we do breathing exercises, which is so important and such an underused tool, I think, in every single environment that I'm ever walking into. It's like the power of just taking a moment to breathe is huge. It resets our nervous systems. And so I take some deep breaths, and then I go to a place, and I call it my emotional playlist. And we were talking a little bit about this before. This is something that is literally like a lifeline in my life. I love teaching this as well. And this is how we create it. So we move to the positive, and I want you to think about, and I have one, I'm just going to get it out for my purposes as well. Um, any situation or interaction that made you feel renewed or positive, or gave you those like uplifting feelings where your battery felt like it just got recharged. Okay, so anything that creates that feeling for you, I want you to write down whatever that situation was or event. For me, it's like working out. Maybe I don't feel that way when I'm starting the workout, but when I finish it, I sure feel like that. Okay. um, finishing a podcast. I wrote that one down for me. Like, I love connecting with other human beings like you, Andy, and like it lights me up. It gives me like hope in the world. There's just so much positivity that I find on podcasts, and so that really lights me up. Going out in nature and going for a hike, hanging with a fun group of women who are also goal getters, having a warm cup of coffee. like on a cold morning, like it can be the smallest thing or the biggest things, like walking, mentioned earlier, walking across the stage at my college graduation, and now I can add to it, watching my son, who is now almost 18, walk across the stage at his high school graduation, the one that when I graduated high school, I was pregnant with. Now, watching him this year walk across that stage on his high school graduation, there was the most, like, it was like fireworks in my soul. And, so I added that one to my emotional playlist, is what we call it. Those situations that just build us up, renew us, and then I want you to, next to the event, I want you to write the emotion that that event gave to you. So again, go back, get out your list of emotions, right? We're going to focus on those positive ones. And what is it? This working out, it makes me feel productive, confident, proud. Finishing a podcast, I feel accomplished, satisfied. Walking in nature, I feel peace, calm. And you're just connecting the situation in your life that has happened. Maybe it was yesterday, or maybe it was 10 years ago, whatever that situation was, and then the emotion that went with it. Okay. And when you take a pause, and when you're in those situations that maybe feel uh, stressful, right? Or you feel angry, you feel frustrated, you feel impatient. When you're taking on those deep breaths, I want you to go to that place where you felt proud of yourself, when you're walking across that stage at your college graduation, when your first drive by yourself in your new car when you were 16, right? When you first get your car and you go for a drive and you roll down all the windows and you turn up the music, like that feeling, like remember those feelings, because those are going to like reset your energy. And you know what? Maybe it won't give you more energy, but it sure can neutralize the negative energy that you're getting from the stressful situation that's making you angry or frustrated. And so I call this list that I want you to hold on to, maybe even fold it up and put it in your wallet, and just whenever something happens, like write down the situation and write down the emotion that it gives to you, because these are so important. And I refer to it like the playlist that you put on for music in your car, where you're like, "You know what? I really just need like some more energy today." And you're like, "I'm going to put on this one playlist." Or maybe you're like not feeling your workout and you're like, "You know what? I got to flip to that one playlist that really gets me going." Like this is that playlist in those stressful situations where maybe you can't remove the stress entirely, but you can neutralize it and put yourself in a different emotion, right? So that the negative emotion doesn't have control over that battery of yours, that inner battery that means so much and how we respond to people and situations in our life. So those are like some of my that is like the exercises, and that's what my husband and I do as well during our clarity sessions. Um and that really just helps regulate our emotions. And when we know how to regulate our emotions and put ourselves into this more positive state, we can think more clearly, we can perform better, we can find solutions to our problems that we didn't even know were there. So it turns on our creative brains.
You're brilliant. Someone once said to me, hire people with batteries included.
Batteries
And
included, that
Jillian
is
has
oh.
batteries included, no doubt about it. And
Oh my
and
goodness,
and we
I'm
are
so gonna
loving it.
take that. I love that so much. Hire people with batteries included.
Isn't it right?
That is so good.
That's so helpful. And so what I like is that you sort of package these things so nicely. This idea of the emotional playlist is so helpful, because we all know that playlist. We
Mhm,
all know that thing
yeah.
that gets us up and can pump. And emotionally, we need the same thing. The amazing Rena Loizu, who's a coach I've worked with in the past, she said, and I quote this probably on every podcast, but it's worth repeating every day, is that she says our emotions are a measure of the quality of our thinking. And so what you're feeling is a measure of the quality of your thinking. And if you're angry or frustrated or irritable or thrilled, they are a measure of the quality of your thinking. And for me, they're the clue. And what you're saying is, well, let's clarity is kindness. Let's get clear about these things. Let's stop being vague. Let's be clear, and let's write them down and be precise. and use precise words and get used to using more precise words, because it's too easy just to default to, we were talking. I hate it when people do this on podcasts. Oh, we were talking before and all the good shit happened then. But we, Gillian and I, when we get together, we just start talking. So apologies, everyone. But, I've lost the point. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
Well, so I was gonna say it was just coming up that like, when we going back to like how we feel, when we know how we feel, we can then match that with a need. It's like I'm feeling overwhelmed, I need to go for a walk in nature and figure out why, and like getting rid of all of the rushed energy in our environments, because I think especially in today's world, there's a ton of rush energy, because everybody expects you to like return that email right away or answer that text message or, go on social media and post there. And also then you have clients and then you have your job over here. And there's just a lot coming. If you have kids, right? They need something. There's a lot of people asking for our time, our attention. There's things in the world, right? And so I just think it's really important for us to really get clear on how we really feel and what do we really need. And I also want to go to the science of what I'm talking about. I think it's really important. I'm kind of like a how and a why person too, being that I have a science background, but I'm also a part of a research institute here in California where I live, and it's called the Heart Math Institute. And they study like the heart and the rhythms of the heart rate variability. You've probably heard that now. It's on our a lot of devices. We find people looking at heart rate variability. It's also a um, indicator of our longevity in life. So I want to mention this because emotions actually create heart rate variability. So what the science shows is that our heart actually sends more messages to our brain than our brain sends to our heart. And which is fascinating because when we're feeling something, our heart rhythm, which is our heart variability rhythm, which is basically like your heartbeat to beat is different every time. And so it creates, if you chart the beat to beat, like the difference between or the time between each beat. I don't want to be too scientific here because I want to make sure this is understandable, but um there's like basically a rhythm that gets charted and it looks different for each emotion. And so, based on when you're in a negative emotion, the rhythms become very chaotic. Your heart rate variability rhythm becomes really chaotic. And that then gets your heart rhythm gets sent to the brain. And then your brain has to process it and figure out what to do with it. And when things are chaotic, it takes the brain longer to figure out like, how am I supposed to respond to this? And so, what happens in our external environment is that we react to situations or people. We become stressed, and it becomes almost like a negative cycle. Whereas if we can train ourselves to go to the positive, even in that stressful situation, when we can use our emotional playlist, our hearts will then go to a more rhythmic motion. So it looks even waveform like, right? And so it's then gets transferred to our brain, and our brain can interpret that a lot more easily. And so then all of our body systems can work better and they work in what we call coherence. And so it's really important, not just from like getting along with people or running your business, but like for your health, for your longevity, for all your body's systems to operate effectively, because your all your systems in your body, whether it's your respiratory, your cardiac system, your digestive system, they all need to work together in some form, right? And so it's much easier for your brain to be able to send all these signals when there's a rhythm coming through that makes sense, that it's rhythmic and smooth rather than chaotic. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. And you're talking to someone who had a small heart problem last year. So,
Yeah.
not caused by this necessarily, but definitely I got very out of sync and it wasn't good.
Well, and they are finding, I mean, just to go down a little bit more on the health side, just because this is what I do, that heart attacks, it's no longer just about like, oh, eat healthy and exercise. It's also stress management because a lot of heart attacks now, like, there's no cause. It could be like this guy that is healthy, walks every day, eats really healthy, but he's still having a heart attack. Why? Because he's has stress in his life where his body systems aren't able to operate effectively. So it's so important to manage this from a health perspective, from a running your business to having a relationship.
Utterly correct, utterly right. And so when you were talking, I was thinking, I know the people listening to this. I know how a lot of them are thinking, and they will be going, "She's brilliant. She's fantastic. She's exceptional. She's different to me. She's made, she's achieved a lot. I'm not able to do that stuff. I'm busy. I'm stressed. I don't have time to go for a walk. I don't have time to." And I'm thinking about, I read an interview this weekend in the Times with the lady that founded a very successful retail business, Jojo Maman Bebe, a children's clothing company. And she ended up having to sell her business because she was sleeping 3 hours a night. She became unwell. She was available to everybody all the time, felt that if she went on holiday, her team would fail without her being there. Couldn't let it go, to the point where it was crushing her. So I do understand, and I've been there myself, where you think, I don't have time to do this. How do I change? How do I step outside and go for the walk? And, I'd love to do a clarity session with my partner, but I get home, I fall asleep. I, so, and yet everything in Emotional Overdraft, the book, is about how can you make that time. And everything I suspect that you're saying is, how do you make the time? So how would you suggest that someone listening finds the time to take a pause and go, I'll do something for myself? How can they find the time? How can they get off the treadmill?
Yeah, a great question, and I actually loved your book for this as well. So if you haven't, I'm sure everybody listening has read your book, but like I love this book because it talks about that and it talks about strategies for that as well. And just to reiterate some of the things is like I like an exercise of start, stop, and keep. Have you ever heard of that? I can't remember who created it, but whenever I'm thinking about starting something, stopping something, or whether I should keep something, I do this exercise that I actually just went over. And then I think about the things like if I'm going to add something, what am I stopping? What am I starting? What am I keeping? Because at the end of the day, like and I just text my friend actually this morning. I said, hey, like, my kids are going back to school on Wednesday, and that creates a little bit more time. And I would love to just catch up with you because I miss you. And, on this emotional playlist I have, like, you're one of those people that make me feel alive and, like, just give me those feel good feelings in my heart. They give me peace and gratitude. So let me know when you're free. And she was like, oh my goodness, we'll have to do a phone call. I am swamped. And I'm like, "Totally get it." And also, don't forget to do and I'm not gonna give her real name, we'll just call it Jessica, just because it's a general name. "Don't forget to have a Jessica moment today." And that's what I responded, and I said, "Whether that's 10 minutes to soak up the sun, 10 minutes to go, just sit by yourself, look out the window." I really think that people should get outside, that's just my personal opinion. I think we do way too much indoors now, and we're not meant for that. So go outside, whether, don't put on your music, don't put on your headphones, and just see what comes up for Jessica, and I think that um that is really one of the keys, for figuring out how we feel and what we really need. Because I think that we all are intuitive. We actually know the answer to most the questions that we're asking. Like we know internally what the answer is, but we don't sit long enough to let ourselves get to the answer, the correct answer that's right for us. And I think that's different for everybody. And so carve that time into your day, like, even if it's 10 minutes. I think it is so important because, if we don't, we end up in a constant state of overwhelm. And so I ask you, like, once you do that exercise I talk about, like, I ask, okay, now what is your baseline emotion? Is it on, did you make that list and was there more stressors or was there more things in your life that you really could call on and be more positive about? And I'll be honest, I've done this work for, a few years now, and I teach it, and that doesn't make me any better than anybody else. I have to do this too. And so, just like I brought up earlier, like last month, like, this year caused a lot of overwhelm. I felt like there was a lot of things coming at me like, "Oh, you need this in your business. If you wanna grow, you need this," and people telling you what you need and all these external things coming at you of, like, what's gonna be best, and I had to sit and pause, and for me, it was like, I took a break from a lot of things in July, and I was like, "No, I'm gonna do clarity sessions, and I'm gonna work on me and figure out what that looks like," because when I know, then everybody else around me is gonna feel better as well.
If you break, you will have to stop. That's the way I think about it. If you carry on because if you get to the point where you're doing 3 hours sleep a night, where, your body knows, your body knows before your brain does,
100%.
and you will break. So it will at some point, your body will go, no, we're stopping now. We're shutting down. And it can be anxiety. It can be overwhelm. It can be depression. It can be all sorts of things. It can be illness, your potential to become ill, whatever it is, your body knows best and will tell you way before your brain does sometimes. So don't let it get to that point. It is inevitable if you don't do something now. So to some extent, what my first job, the head of production used to say, there's always time for a reprint. So I was a 19-year-old panicking about getting something done. And he said, if we get this wrong, and we made literature for people, he said, there's always time for a reprint. So if there's always time for a reprint, there's time to get this right first time. And I think that's the same with our brains, is that there is time to take a pause, even if it's 10 minutes, even if it's going for a walk every day, even if it's standing up. I'm with you on outside. My newsletter is called Rambling On because I ramble on and because I love being outside and rambling. So
I love
um,
that so much.
it, get outside if you possibly can. But the other thing I'd chip in then is that we should trust ourselves. Most people listening to this, you have all the answers. You're so right, Julian. You're so right. We do know the answers. As a coach, I rarely bring the answers. I just help people tease them out. And the amazing Martin Palethorpe, who's very influential in my life, said that 90% of our is not a real number. He made it up, but it feels right. 90% of our thinking goes on in our subconscious, and therefore 10% goes on in our conscious. And if you try and force your thinking into your conscious brain, you're pushing everything you're trying to deal with into that tiny space, the 10%. So he says, go and take exercise, go and swim in the sea, go and do some, disconnect. And then what happens is that 90% of your brain, you will hear it and it's processing all the time anyway. And it does the amazing heavy lifting. Don't keep trying to force stuff into your conscious because you have a moment. Find some time to hear the subconscious. And, that's that moment in the shower where you go, that's it, that's the answer. Or you have a dream sometimes, or you're out running. I don't wear headphones when I'm running. I always run without headphones. And I'll be 2 or 3 miles in and I'll think, get me 2 or 3 miles. But I'll be 2 or 3 miles in and I'll think, I wish I brought something to scribble on. I'll try and remember that thing,
Uh-huh,
because you do
uh-huh.
get that clarity, and that's your subconscious
Yes.
doing the heavy lifting. So Gillian's right. Even if it's just 10 minutes, step away from it.
Yeah, it's funny, I just was talking to, a friend the other day, and she was telling me about, like, "Yeah, and then something just came to me, I'm like, that's what I wanna do," and she's like, "I was in the shower," and I'm like, "Yeah," and she's like, "I don't know why I always think about things, like, things just come up for me there. Isn't that funny?" And I was like, "No, it makes so much sense because it's a place where, like, nobody's coming to get you. Like, you can't bring your phone in the shower." So your brain can actually, like, run through its process and think through the questions you're asking yourself. It's so true.
So I suppose I'm answering my question saying it's very difficult. It feels very difficult to find the time, but there is always the time. And there are I'm not plugging the book. There are lots of things in the book that allow you to behave differently because most emotional overdraft is coming from behavior, which tends to be habits. So if you can change the habits, it miraculously disappears. Some of this problem does just evaporate. But I also appreciate it's not easy to change habits. That's why there's a whole genre of book about habits. James Clear and all of his gang. Habits are really easy to form and hard to break.
I also too, I think I wanted to mention this, we talk about a little bit about resilience. And, the Heart Math Institute defines it like this. And I actually literally I post this on things because I think it's a good reminder for everybody. Resilience is the capacity to prepare for, recover from, and adapt in the face of stress, challenge, or adversity. So basically, it's like,
Sorry, could you say that again, Gillian? Because it's
yeah.
important.
Yeah, so resilience is the capacity to prepare for, recover from, and adapt in the face of stress, challenge, or adversity. So we think of this, like the how much energy we have stored in our batteries, in our inner batteries. So the energy you have to use not only physically but mentally and emotionally. And so I say that because we can build our resilience before stressful situations as well. And then we can also use that emotional playlist and all of the things in your book, The Emotional Overdraft, as well, that are really good pointers for especially in business that you can apply to, I believe, any area of life. But these are the things we need to remember is like, if your resilience is low, you can build your resilience by doing these other things, like going in nature, like learning to trust yourself and your intuition and having those moments where you don't put on the headphones. And so I like to just point out, like, not only do you need it in a stressful situation, it's good to prepare for the stressful situations by doing the things that increase your resilience, those things that bring you those positive emotions. Because emotions, the reason why I talk about them so much is emotions are our primary energy drainers, but they can also be our primary energy drivers, right? So they can totally decrease our battery or they can increase our inner battery. And so what does it look like for you listening, to build that resilience? What are those things on your positive list that you can do to prep yourself for your day? Because I think the number one thing we can guarantee in life is that, like, we are going to be in situations that cause us stress. That's just the world we live in. That's just a fact of life. We're going to go through adversity. We're going to meet a challenge in our life. So what are the things we can do at the beginning of our day to prep for that? And this is so I mean, it could be deep breathing when you wake up in the morning, whatever it is that lights you up, I think is really important to just use to start your day.
Yeah, totally, totally right. And I'm I think we don't talk about often because, as you were talking, I was thinking about, well, for me, it's running. For people, it's doing sports. These things we give up very quickly. Going on holiday, being with our family.
Mhm.
We're
I'm
drawing from
guilty of it
their
too.
emotional.
I'm
Most
totally
of us
guilty
are.
of that.
Most of us are.
Yeah.
But I think about my friend David, who um, ran a very successful advertising agency and is one of the nicest people I know. And he plugged into his resilience, or he recharged himself by volunteering with the Samaritans. And other than finding it very humbling and centering for him, because he realized whatever he was dealing with wasn't what some of the people phoning up were dealing with, but it stopped him thinking about his own things. It just made him focus on the person he was talking to, because it was absolutely, literally life and death that he listened to that person. And in doing that, he disconnected from whatever he was dealing with, and David's dealt with a lot in his life. Um, so this idea of community and society is the bit that we don't talk about. We easily talk about health and wellness and sports and eating, and they're all right, and they're all the right thing to talk about. But community and society and giving back, these things it could be church for some people. These things are just as valuable. And if we forego them because we think we don't have time, we're just unplugging ourselves from other sources of energy. And I talk about a cell phone, a mobile phone. When it's run out of battery, it would be ridiculous just to scream at the phone, one more call, one more call. I want just give me one more call, because it's run out.
Yep.
The battery's gone. And,
Mhm.
and that's what we do with ourselves, though. We run ourselves
So true.
down and we go, come on, one more meeting, just stop. You don't need to, just carry on, push through, man up, all those awful masculine sort of phrases that happen, certainly when you're a guy.
Exactly.
Um, it's clearly nonsensical, but we can't in the moment see it. So if you do nothing else, please think of emotional overdraft. Think of your emotional overdraft in that moment. And if that gives you a tiny pause, if it gives you a tiny pause to think differently or maybe do something slightly differently, then it's doing its job. So you don't need to learn new stuff. Listen to what Jillian says. You know the answers. It's not always easy, but the more you do it, the better you get at it. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. And then you start to see incredible results. So please find the time.
I totally agree with that. And, it made me think of like, you know, um, being a mom, it can be hard because there's, always people wanting your time, in any situation. And like, I'm not gonna lie, it is challenging, and so it goes back to communication, like someone in your community you can team up with or your husband to say, "This is how I feel, and I just need to go for a walk in nature and figure out, you know, what's going on upstairs," because ultimately you have the answer, so in any area of life, that totally applies. It's so good.
My lived experience is not being a mother. I'm a father, but it's a very different, and certainly when my kids were born 30 years ago, it's a very different experience.
Yeah.
Lots of mums work, and then they come home and they have to look after their kids and maybe their partner and their home. You call it the CEO of the house, don't you, of the home. And you're straight into the next job with the next pile of things to do. How in those circumstances, forget leadership and forget emotional overdraft in business. How do you deal with that emotional overdraft when you're at home? What do you do? Because we're sitting here going to take a break and go for a walk. You can't leave a 2-year-old. So what do you do?
Yeah. So and this has worked for my kids because my kids have never been like the 5 a.m. wakers. So for me, I always get up at 6 a.m. because I know my kids wake up around 7. And I give myself time, and I might not do anything. I might literally just sit in the dark on my couch with my little tea or cup of coffee or whatever it is. Or I might I listen to Daily Hope by Pastor Rick Warren. It's one of my favorite things to start my day. And I just listen to it quietly, or I just sit and I see what comes up for me. And I have that quiet time to make sure that I'm doing something for me to make sure my battery is fuller than it was yesterday, a little bit even. So I have the patience to deal with whatever's coming next, and oftentimes, like when we don't make time for ourselves, we know what happens, right? Like we're reactive. We're like, oh my gosh, like just leave me alone for 5 seconds. Or we're constantly yelling at our kids. And then we're like, oh man, why'd I do that? Like, don't worry, I'm there too sometimes. Like, this is not.
And I've got to tell you that the guilt that generates from those moments lasts for decades.
Mom guilt is like probably one of like the realest things in the world. Like I'm just going to say it. Like, it's like when you take time out for yourself, like we have to really change our mindset on that because, by making time for yourself, you're showing up better as a parent, And I know that we've heard that before, and I also know that it can be so hard to actually feel that way, but, like, that's why I'm going back to writing it down.
Yeah, it's practice, isn't it? Practice.
Because then we realize, like, okay, when you went on that little coffee date and left your kids for 30 minutes and just had some you time with a friend and it felt so good, write it down. Like what was the feeling? Like, did you feel like calm and content, connected? What did you feel, you know? And write it down. Um when you are so this is like I also do this exercise, the mind map exercise. And I do that a lot because sometimes as a mom, we have such an endless to-do list that our brains just feel cluttered and overwhelmed. And so by just writing it all down like a mind map, like, and just letting your brain go wherever it wants to and just dumping, like, just dump whatever's on there, it honestly it releases stress for me. So maybe try that for you. I also will put myself on a timeout. I'm like, "Okay, mommy needs a timeout," you know, and because, people think like, "Oh, it's like a negative thing," but I actually don't think so. I don't say like, "You have to go on timeout for this amount of time," but I actually use it for myself. So like when I and that shows that like it's like, "Do you need a timeout?" Instead of like, "Go to your room, you're on timeout." It's like, "Do you need a timeout?" Because they hear me talk about it. And so it's like, mommy needs a timeout because I feel really frustrated, or I feel really overwhelmed, or I'm feeling really impatient because I've asked these things 5 times and I don't feel really heard right now. So I'm going to remove my situation myself because I'm really frustrated right now and I'm not going to react the way I want to. And I'll come back in 5 minutes. And so I will literally go in my room or in my office somewhere or in my backyard, wherever I can escape for a little bit. And obviously, if you have really little kids, so maybe that's not, doable, but go on the other side of the room, or you can put headphones on, but you don't actually have to listen to anything. They can just think you have headphones on, like just some little tricks there. Um, and just let yourself do your deep breathing exercises, like, put yourself in that emotional playlist, like, rewire that brain and then come back to the situation. It's not gonna happen perfectly 100% of the time. I will be a living example. I'm the first to admit it. Like, we're never gonna be perfect, but, having that pattern and developing the pattern will help it become more often of a thing, and then, our batteries won't have to be so done at the end of the day. I could literally I think we could literally go for like 3 hours because, I could go into then, like, tired and going to bed at night with your husband, like, that's a thing, like, there's so many things we could talk about that emotional overdraft has to do with, like, when we are constantly making, um, withdrawals, right, and not, adding to our emotional bank, it's huge, and it affects every area of our life, and so in order to perform at an optimal level in order to respond the way that we hope and we wish we're going to. We need to implement these things in your book and the things we're talking about today to be more successful at it. Not perfect, doesn't exist, but more successful.
Yeah, perfect doesn't exist, and don't strive for perfect.
No, because then you're just gonna beat yourself up in a negative cycle. Give yourself grace.
Well, that's where we should stop. I think that's the best. We could talk for 3 hours, or we could probably talk for 3 days.
We could totally.
But I think give yourself grace is a great thought. There's lots and lots of material. I say this every time on this podcast, but I hope you listen through this thing and then go back or read the notes and just go back through it again and pick some stuff out that's really useful for you, because there's so much in here. I knew there would be. The way we end, and I think we've covered this, as I ask if you have one simple change. So the idea is of emotional overdraft is there's 10 drivers of an emotional overdraft, and if you can change those things, you will get better, and your overdraft will get smaller. And we share simple changes, but I have a suspicion you've shared yours in your thinking already, but clarify it if you want to.
Yeah. I'll give you this last thing. Write down, how do I really feel? Why do I really feel like this? Have I ever felt this way before? Is it related? And is that the whole truth?
And again, please.
So, how do I really feel? Why do I feel this way? Have I ever felt this way before? And is that the real truth? Because and I say that at the end of, like, asking yourself, "Is that the whole truth?" Because like we were talking before this episode, like, we often lie to ourselves. And I could talk a whole lot on that too, and the lens that I lived my life through in the beginning before I did the internal work versus the one I live through now. We often live through these lenses. And usually it's the lens is based on the baseline emotion that we went through and the stressors of our life. And so mine kind of revolved around, like, do I matter? Right? Which came from my childhood. And I would ask that question of everybody I met. And then I would, decrease my self worth by it. So is that the truth? That it's a really important question when you're looking at how you feel and what you really need. And has that ever occurred in your past? Is it related? And then is that the whole truth? Do you really not matter? No, that's not the truth. It's never the truth. So I'll leave you with that.
I've got nothing to add, people. Other than go and listen to Jillian's podcast. Where can people find you? I mean, obviously, people type your name into Google, but be tell us where you are.
Yeah, I'm actually the most probably on Instagram. It's Life Without Secrets podcast is my handle. But you can find me there, and then you can find me on my website, lifewithoutsecrets.com. If you need help in your relationship, I also have a little magazine that you can download for free off of my website, which is really fun to read and get to know me and my husband and see how we can help you as well. And then and those are the biggest 2, I would say, that you can find me on. Yeah. Connect with me, DM me if you've been listening to this, because it's always fun to meet new people, but I always like to know where they come from, like, don't just add me as a friend, like, DM me and tell me how you found me.
Tell them Andy sent you.
Yeah.
Um, Fabulous. Jillian, that was brilliant and just as good as I hoped it would be. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me. This has been so fun.